Hi everyone, so this is Levente, Solution Engineer at memoQ, and today we will talk a little bit about this cloud server, basically how to set up a cloud server and how to get started with it. It might be interesting to those who didn't use memoQ yet, but also for those who are already memoQ users. I will try to talk about those kind of features that you might not be using at the moment. To get started, what we usually say about memoQ is that it's fairly easy to get started, right? To learn the basics. We offer a 30-day trial. We offer a kickoff training, which is usually 90 minutes. And by the time you learn how to do the basic operations, but that doesn't mean that you know all the functions, you know all the functionality possibilities with memoQ. So to get started with the memoQ Cloud, it's even easier than the other options that we have because you can do all of the setup yourself. So by simply going to memoq.com or my.memoq.com directly, you can register an account, and without any credit card details, without any payment, you can start your own 30-day trial. You will receive the URL for your memoQ server. This is the only thing that we will need from here actually. But you can also set up how many licenses you have. In memoQ, you have 3 types of licenses. Just to quickly mention these, project manager licenses would be for obviously project managers. They will be the ones creating projects, importing documents, and assigning these documents to translators. You also have Translator Pro licenses for the translators to work in the memoQ client. And you would also have web licenses, which actually come for free on the cloud server. And these could be, again, used by the translators to work in the web-based version of memoQ. And let's assume that you started with 5 licenses, and then a new colleague came to your company and you need another license. Again, without contacting us, you can just do that yourself. You can add the new Translator Pro license, and it will immediately show up on your memoQ server. So it's all self-served. You can just do this yourself. Now, once you have this cloud server, as I mentioned, what we will need is the actual URL. This is how we'll access the server itself. So let me just grab that, and we will go into the memoQ client. Usually, this is what you will use for project management. You can also use the web-based version, as I mentioned, but let's just stick to this one for now. And the first thing I want to show you is the server administrator window. This is where you can actually manage the licenses, the users who can log into your server. So all I will do is just paste that URL right here. Let's connect. And the first interesting page will be the user management. Now, obviously, whoever already worked with memoQ as a project manager, they use this user management window. Every translator, project manager, proofreader will need a username to be able to log into your memoQ server. Usually what you do is you click on add, you fill in the details, and then you send an email to the translator that, okay, here's your username, here is your password. You can use this to log in and start the translation. But instead of doing that, there's actually an easier way to do it. And that would be done through the web version. I can use the exact same URL. I'm just using a different server for now. But basically, you can log in here, go to the admin and users page, and you can create usernames here as well. The difference will be that here you have an option, user will set their own password. So instead of setting the password yourself and sending that in an email to the translator, you can just fill in then their name and their username, and they will receive an email from which they can set their own password, and they can use that to log into your server. So if you have to create, let's say 10, 15, 20 users, this might be a better way to do that. When you are creating users, you also have options to put these users into groups, to organize the users in a way. There are, of course, built-in groups like internal translators, administrators, and project managers, but you can also create your own groups to, again, just to organize these users in a way. With the built-in groups, you have to be a little bit careful because those built-in groups come with special permissions. Let's say the internal translators group is a common mistake that project managers do, that they add every translator to this group. And that would mean that these internal translators can actually see all the different resources on my memoQ server. And obviously, I don't want to do that. So again, just to mention, you have to be careful with these. If you really have external translators that you might not trust that much, then I would suggest you to create your own groups. When you are creating these groups, you will also see an option which could be interesting, which is the members can start projects option. And this could be useful if, again, let's say you started working with memoQ. A year later, a new project manager joins your company, and that project manager will have to create projects on your server. Now, I could say that this project manager won't be a real project manager. I won't add them to the project managers group. Instead, what I would do is I create a new group. Let's say I could call this a junior PM. And I can tell that this user can create projects on the server, but they should use project templates. So they can only work with predefined settings on my server. And that way I can make sure that, that they won't mess up the project creation itself. And of course, later on, when they learn how memoQ works, I can add them to the real group as well. So that's group management. Again, you can add the users to these, but also it's not mandatory to add them. So for example, I want to create a new translator user. I could just skip group management completely, and that translator will still be able to work just fine. And so once you have your users, you have your groups, we could move on to the actual licenses. If you go to cal licenses, you will see how many licenses you have on your server. So here you can see I have 2 Translator Pro, 1 Project Manager, and 5 web licenses. And I should see the same numbers here as well. Again, if I make any change on the my.memoq.com website, that would be reflected here as well, and I can immediately use those licenses. So here on the first page, you would see who is currently using my licenses. And you can also export the history of these. So if you want to check which freelance translator used your licenses, you could do that from here. Then if we go to grant to user/groups, this is where I can actually tell memoQ who should be able to use a license from my server. Again, I want to mention this because you have to be careful with it. Let's assume that you work with an external translator. You could say that, let's say this test user that I have can use a Translator Pro license till this expiration date. This could be, for example, the deadline of a document, right? So I could give him, let's say, 5 days. Why I'm saying that you have to be careful with this assignment is because this way the translator would be able to take the license from your server, but they could use it to do whatever they want. They could work on a different memoQ server. They could work on someone else's project. So instead of doing that, when you are working with external translators, we usually suggest to use project permissions instead. So whenever you assign a translator to a document, they will receive permission to take a license from your server till the deadline. Plus, actually, if we go into project settings, you also will see that there is a buffer time. So with the default settings, this translator would be able to take a license till, let's say, 5 days plus this buffer time that we have here. And that's without assigning an actual license. Of course, if you are working with internal translators, it would be perfectly fine to assign the license directly here. They can take it and work whenever they want, even if no document is assigned to them. So that's something that could be interesting. And if we move on to the different settings here on the left side, we have to mention archiving, which is kind of a new function in memoQ. But basically, it's a way to clean up your dashboard. the dashboard is the main window of memoQ where you will see all of your previous projects that you created. Now, obviously, if you have been working with memoQ for a year or two, here you can have hundreds of projects. But instead of having that, you can set up memoQ to automatically archive and remove the old projects from this list. That way you will have a cleaner look. And of course, from these archives, you always have the option to restore those projects. So let's say you archived a 1-year-old project, then a year later, I can just restore it and continue from the same state. You will also see a performance counters option, which could be useful for 2 reasons. Here you see not who is currently working, but how many users are currently working on your server. This could be useful if, for example, a maintenance is planned and you obviously want to do that when no one is working. The other useful thing could be translation memories currently loaded. So obviously on your memoQ server, you can have again, hundreds of resources. These can be translation memories, term bases, live docs. There are many types of resources. But if I have, let's say, 1,000 translation memories, and then I see in the performance counters that on a daily basis, I only use, let's say, 50 of those or 100 of those, then you can consider to maybe start removing them or start merging them or look into the workflows that you are currently doing to see why you have those many translation memories. And the last thing that I wanted to mention here is the broadcast message. This kind of relates back to the performance counter. So as I mentioned here, you can see how many users are currently working in memoQ. If you want to send a message to all of these users, again, let's say a maintenance is planned and the memoQ server will be down for a while. I don't want to send each and every translator an email. Instead of that, I can just set the broadcast message directly in memoQ. And whenever they log in, they would see that message. And so once you go through all of these different options here, we can actually jump into the project creation. So for that, you have 2 options in memoQ. I will just quickly go through this. You can do it manually using the new online project function, or I could also use those predefined settings that I mentioned with the junior project managers. So if I want to do it manually, let's give this a name. Of course, we can use that name later on to filter for the project. And then you have some metadata. Usually the metadata is used to organize the project, right? Later on, I can filter for a specific client, and maybe I can run a report on those projects, how many words I translated. But these metadatas can have another use as well. If you are using the project templates, those predefined settings that I mentioned, these could be used to assign client-specific resources to the project. So let's say my client wants me to use a certain terminology, then I can create a term base where I indicate that this term base is for the client, let's say memoQ. And that way I can automatically assign that term base to any project where this metadata is used. I will just leave that empty for now. Language is not that important, so let me just select 2. This will be an English to German project. And then you have the workflow options on how the translators and how the reviewers will be working. Most of these functions are quite straightforward, I would say. Track changes works exact same way as in Microsoft Word. It could be useful to enable it if, let's say, you are doing a proofreading and your client wants you to deliver a track changed Word document. Then, of course, you would enable it. You have options like workflow phases can overlap. This could result in faster turnaround times because the reviewer and the translator can work at the same time. They don't have to wait for each other. But maybe 2 options that are not that straightforward. One of them is include skeleton for final export. This allows the translator to export the translated file from memoQ. So if you are working on a confidential file let's say again with external translators, then you might want to disable this, not to allow them to download that file from memoQ. And the other option is the communication option. Again, usually this is disabled if you are working with external translators and you don't want them to communicate with each other. Whoever is proofreading the document might know the translator, and with the default settings, they could talk to each other within memoQ, even if they don't know each other. I will just disable this and I will show you how it doesn't work if it's disabled. So let's just click finish. Our project will be created, and then we can jump into importing a file. And importing a file is quite straightforward again, right? So you just select import, you select your file, and you will be presented with this progress bar. Now, if you are importing a huge file, this can take a while to import. So instead of waiting for the whole import process to finish, you can just click on hide, and then you will be presented with, at least I should be presented with, the so-called task tracker. And I can also monitor the progress of that import directly from here. And while the import is ongoing, I can do other stuff in memoQ. I will just quickly create another project just to demonstrate something else. Just give me 1 second here. And that is that you can actually have multiple projects open at the same time. So whenever you start working on a project, it will open as a separate window. And as you can see right now, I will have 2 projects open. This is the new one that I created. This is the old one. And that way you can just jump between them. And another common mistake that, that sometimes happens is that project managers get lost in which window is which here. So there are 2 things that I usually say. If you see memoQ online project here on the top, and you see these accept buttons here, that means that you are managing a project. You can safely close these ones, and you will just go back to the dashboard that way. If you accidentally close the dashboard, sometimes what I see is that project managers from here close the whole application. So they see, okay, I don't have the dashboard anymore. How do I go back? And so what they do, they close the application and they restart it. And of course, you are presented with the dashboard then. Instead of doing that, I could just click on this checkout local copy function, and that will bring back the original dashboard window as well. So I don't have to close the whole application. And let's go back to our project that we created. Here we go. So once you have the document that you want to import, the next step is, of course, usually to decide who will work on this project. As I mentioned, on your memoQ server, you will have a list of users. And from that list of users, you would decide who will be part of this project. Let's say I only want to add the test user. In this window, in this add user window, I can not only select users, but I can also select groups. So I could say add everyone who is part of the administrators group, and that way you can see that 2 users were selected. So that's just another use case for the grouping of those users. Now, once you have your users, you can also go to this languages and roles window that is sometimes not used, but it could be useful for automatic assignment. So if the same users are always the translator and the same users are always the proofreaders, I can tell memoQ that. So I can say that the admin user in this project will always act as a translator, and the test user will always act as a reviewer. And this could help me because let's say I have to import 100 files, and I have to assign all of those 100 files to these users. Then instead of doing that manually by simply selecting the users here, like so, what I could do is use the automatic assignment function. So I can right-click the document, can select auto assign, And based on those settings that I set in the people window, you will see that the admin user will be the translator, test user will be the reviewer. Okay, so let's say we have the assignment. I will also want to go through the resources, just because there can be some interesting options there as well. Let's start from the top with LiveDocs. LiveDocs usually have two use cases. One is to import reference files, and the other use case is to reuse previous translations that you did without a tool. But one thing that is a little bit hidden is whenever you are importing reference files, you can not only import files that memoQ supports. So of course, Word document, text files, these would work perfectly fine, but let's assume I want to import a video as a reference. In that case, what I can do is I can select this filter configuration, import as is. And with that filter, you can import any kind of file into this LiveDocs. This file, of course, will be available for the translator to download. And of course, from there, they would need a specific application to open it. If we are talking about a video, it would have to be a video player. But with that filter, you can import any kind of file. And it will also have a separate icon, so you will see what's a reference and what's an alignment here. Then we can also talk about translation memories just quickly, because sometimes that causes confusion as well. In memoQ, you can select as many translation memories in a project as you want. And then you will see these different types being assigned to the translation memories. Just to quickly mention what these do, the working translation memory is usually a temporary storage for the translations. Whenever a project is completed, the working translation memory is usually deleted, while the master translation memory is usually the final place for the translation. It will only contain the reviewed entries. Another confusion with these is that the master translation memory is not updated automatically. So you either have to do that manually. Whenever a document is done, you can use a function called confirm and update, or we can automate the update of this translation memory by using the predefined settings, by using the templates themselves. Auto-assign is available in memoQ templates. Yes, you could do that. I will talk a little bit about that later. And then to talk about term bases, there are two interesting options here. So usually what project managers do, they create a new term base and they assign that term base to the project, right? From there on, you can build your own terminology as you work. If I right-click that term base and select properties, you will see those two options that I wanted to mention. One of them is the clean up unwanted sublanguages. So let's say my term base here contains English, French, German, and Germany entries. But let's assume that I don't need the entries in the Germany, or I don't want anyone to be confused by that. With this option, I can remove that language from the term base, and I can actually merge the entries into the regular German language. So I could just press this, say that I want to delete the Germany language, and merge the entries into the German one. And there we go. It should disappear if I refresh it. Obviously, whenever you try to demonstrate something, it doesn't work. And the other option that I wanted to mention here is the new term defaults. So whenever you add the new entry to the term base, it will have the default settings. For example, case sensitivity permissive, matching 50% prefix. These all tell memoQ when to give you matches from the term base. And here you can set up the new defaults. So let's say I don't care about case sensitivity for any of my languages. I could just select that here. And then whatever new entries my translators add will have this new option selected in it. The merge option for QTerm. So the question is, will the merge function for sublanguages be available in QTerm? I believe that's not in the plans right now. It's something that we can definitely check and maybe consider for a future update. And from there, I want to jump into settings. Here, I don't really want to go through all the different settings that you can set. These are so-called light resources in memoQ. You will find options like machine translation, non-translatables, which is really just a list of words that you don't have to translate. If those words appear in your source text, then it would be highlighted for the translator. You can set up auto translation rules. Let's say you want to convert from Celsius to Fahrenheit in an automated way. You could set it up right here. And if we go into the general settings, then you will see that those options that we set during the project creation actually cannot be changed. So again, just to mention that you have to be careful with those to set the correct options right then, and because then you would have to create a completely new project. If I come here, you will also see that some of those options, like confidentiality measures, can actually be changed. So you have to keep in mind which one can and which one cannot be changed after the project is created. And just another function that might be not as straightforward. When you are done with the project creation, usually what you do is you launch the project. Launching the project means that an email notification is sent to the translator and they can start working on that document. But what if I want to revert this and maybe make some more changes to the project and launch it again? You don't see any obvious option for that. But if you go into history, notification history, I can actually kind of reset the project with this clear notification history option. And again, I would have the ability to make any kind of changes, launch the project again, and send a new notification to maybe the new users who were assigned to that project. And with that, let me just close this project management window for now. And let's go back to the dashboard where, again, you will have a few options that can be interesting. One of these is that you can run project reports. Usually the reports are found within the project. So if I open any of my projects, you have the reports window and you can run a progress report on how the project is progressing. You can compare the different versions of the document. But this one report is actually hidden in this right click context menu. You can run the project report and it would give you an Excel file with all the file names that you have within that project, all the assignments, the word count of those documents. So you can use that to have an idea about the project itself. Another thing that sometimes causes confusion is this question mark. So the size on the dashboard usually tells you how many words you have within that project. And if I have this weighted counts option enabled, you will see that it only tells me a question mark because memoQ doesn't know that yet. If you see this, then what you have to do is run statistics on the file and enable the weighted counts option. And if I do that, the question mark should turn into a real number for us. And again, let's hope that I'm right. Yes, there we go. So in this project, if I ran the statistics, I can now see the weighted counts, or of course you can just disable that as well. And while we are here on the dashboard, another option that I believe is rarely used is the reassign function. So let's assume that you assign many documents in many projects to a translator. And then the translator tells you that, sorry, I cannot do this for this and this reason. Now, of course, I could go through each and every project, go there, change the assignment, accept the changes. That's perfectly fine, but I have to know which projects that translator is assigned in. I have to find the documents as well. Instead of doing that, what I can do is use the reassign function. So here in this project, the test user is now the translator. If I press reassign, I can select that I want to reassign the test user in the translation role. And let's say I want to reassign it to the admin user. And I can do this for multiple projects, of course. I don't have to go through all of them. And you will see that now the admin user is assigned as a translator. Another maybe useful option that is, I believe, rarely used is cloning a project. So previously I talked about those predefined settings that you can do with the templates. If you don't want to do that, another option that you have is set up a project properly, like we did here, right? We created a project, we went through the resources, the users and everything. And from there on, I could keep on cloning this project and basically reapplying the exact same settings to all of the projects that I want to use from there on. Of course, this is a limited version of the template because templates could be used to create different projects for different clients. And just the last thing here, still on the dashboard, that is the filtering option. Usually the filter is used by simply entering the name of the project, right? So I can just enter like this, press enter, and then I find that project. If I click on the little pencil, you will see more options that you can actually choose from. For example, if you use the client metadata while creating the project, of course, I could filter for a specific client name. I could even filter for the translator. So if the translator is admin, then show me those projects. And instead of doing this, so instead of clicking on the pencil icon and using these little drop-down menus, I could also just type these in. So I could say client is, let's say, memoQ, press enter, and then I filtered for any project where the client metadata is memoQ. So that's pretty much what I wanted to show on the dashboard itself. Let's go into the resource console, where you can actually see all the different resources that you can store in memoQ. So as you can see, there are many resources. We won't go through all of these. I already mentioned a few of them. What I wanted to mention is kind of a new function, and that is that you can manage multiple, in this case, translation memories at once. So I have 3 translation memories here. Let's say I want to export all of them. I can just select them, select export, and I will receive 3 different files for the 3 exported translation memories. Again, if you don't want to wait for this progress bar to finish, you could hide it, and then it would appear on the task tracker. And you can do the same with the import option. So on my desktop now, I have 3 TMX files for the 3 translation memories that I exported. Let's assume I wanted to merge these into 1 translation memory. I can just select that, say import, and I can select all 3 of these and import all of them at once into the translation memory. And the same applies, of course, to the different resources as well. I will close this one as well, and I will go into a project itself. So if I open the project, this is what usually the translators see. So if I'm here, obviously you can do this as a translator, but you can also do this as a project manager. So you are allowed to download the project, check what was imported. And if you do this, sometimes what I see is that people close the project to be able to manage it again. So of course, I could close the project. I will be presented with the dashboard. I can double click on the project and I can make the changes that I want. But again, instead of doing that, what I wanted to show you is that you can simply say either open for management, and that just opens this project. You can do it directly from here. Or you also have a manage projects window that you could open. You could have this open at all times. And then while working on a project, you can still manage all the others that you have. Again, double clicking on the project name would open a completely new window for us. And while we are here within the project itself, I just wanted to show one feature actually that is probably rarely used, and that is extracting terminology. So before the translation starts, you could build a terminology that the translator will have to use in this project, and that could be helped by this extract terms option. If I press this and if I have a proper document, memoQ would give me a list of words that might be useful to enter into the term base. And that way I can help my translators before they start working. Of course, this feature is also available for the translators. So if you have someone who is willing to do this for you, that's an option as well. And if we open the document itself, another feature that I just quickly wanted to mention is the regex Stagger, with which you can protect specific parts of the document, of the translatable file. Let's say I don't want my translators to modify any of the URLs, then I could turn those URLs into a tag. And that way I can be sure that the translator will insert these as is into the translation. Again, you have to be careful with this because there's no real way to going back if you make some more changes, right? So once you tagged some of the content, that will be tagged forever, unless of course you re-import the document. And that's another function that could be shown. So let's assume that we already translated a few segments. Of course, I won't do a real translation. I will just do a copy source to target here. And as you are progressing through the translation, let's assume that you receive an updated version of the same source file. What I sometimes see is that in that case, project managers import that file as a completely new document. But since memoQ has a version history, what you could do instead is re-import the document. Of course, by re-importing the document, you might be surprised that all of the translations are gone that you did. But that just means that you have to use an additional function, which is called XTranslate. And with that function, you can continue from where you left off. You will see all the different segments that you didn't touch yet. So you are not losing any work that way. And so these are just a few settings that I wanted to show you, and let's see what kind of questions we have so we can answer those as well. Does Web Service API allow to share weighted count statistic result with other applications? I believe it does, yes. So through the Web Service API, if you want to connect to any external application, then you can, of course, use the Web Service API to run the statistics. You can run the statistics with the weighted counts enabled, and you should be able to get a file that contains this. So the next one is, are there plans to allow removal of users from people section on a project through Reassign? I don't think that will be available. That's a feature request that I can forward, but that's not the main reason why the Reassign function was put there. So next one, how does XTranslate behave if segments were pre-translated using MT and there is a minor version post pre-translation? I believe that shouldn't matter. So even if you, or is the question whether XTranslate would overwrite the pre-translated segment? You could just use the chat to answer that question of mine. maybe I can also just check what happens if you just give me 1 second here. So basically the question is, let's assume this is how we left our project, and I will just pre-translate this segment. I just need the translation memory for that, of course. And I believe it won't overwrite the pre-translated segment because we want the pre-translation instead. And while I'm doing that, I will answer another question. Can you recommend Rook Legacy 2? Yes, I can, but it's still in the early phases. Can you use reimport option while translators are working on the file, or do they need to stop working? You can use reimport while the translator is working. Yes, of course, you probably want to notify the translators because the file that they are currently working on will be removed from the project, and they will have to close and reopen the document to see whatever changes you made. So yes, you can, but it's better to notify them. memoQ failed to open LiveDocs corpora listed below. Where did I get that message? Was it here? And if that's the case, then it's probably a false positive, and actually it works fine. Usually these messages that you get here on the bottom don't cause any issues. What it sometimes means is when you download the project, you also have to download the resources. And downloading those resources sometimes takes longer than downloading the project itself. And if I add these LiveDocs that we have been working with, the best way to try whether it causes any issues for you or not is to use the concordance function. So with concordance function, you can do a lookup in the translation memory or in the LiveDocs. If I enter a word here and press concordance, if this works fine, then I can be sure that that message really didn't mean anything and you can just ignore it. If you get a warning in this window that you couldn't do a lookup in one of your resources, then that's something that we should investigate. It could be a problem with that LiveDocs. It could be a problem with the content of that LiveDocs. It's hard to tell. And while waiting for any other question, I will do what I mentioned, that is trying to demonstrate that. Okay. So what I'm trying now is what happens if we pre-translate the document and then run XTranslate, and hopefully I can. Okay, there we go. So we have a pre-translated segment. Now I will run the XTranslate on the document one more time before synchronizing. And there you go, Nino. That would answer the question about XTranslate. I was actually wrong, it seems. So if you run XTranslate after pre-translation, it would still overwrite those pre-translated segments. Just make sure that you are not confirming segments during pre-translation.
All right. If we have no more questions that we can answer now, I would suggest to call it a day. We are a bit over time, but I hope you don't mind. Thank you very much, Levente, for the great and informative session. And a big thank you to all attendees for joining us today. Have a great rest of the day. Take care and hope to see you at other memoQ webinars soon.